Hello and welcome to another anime lore and theory video. I'm Shergok, your host, and today we are going to take a closer look at characters you would overestimate if you call them simple-minded. But before we're going to take a closer look at any of this, let me quickly thank my Patreons for supporting this channel, as well as say thanks to all users of the YouTube thanks function for making one-time donations. And with that said, let's get to the topic at hand. And let's continue with Philip, a man without any formal education, who nevertheless believed that fate had chosen him for greatness. As the third-born son of a lone noble, Philip was a replacement child and received hardly any form of schooling, because every single resource in his household was invested into the firstborn son. When that son died in the Battle of the Cat's Plain, Philip was suddenly the only remaining son, and was reluctantly acknowledged. Convinced he was destined for greatness and that fate had chosen him, he not only broke all diplomatic protocol, but also tried to cozy up to the Prime Minister of the Sorcerer Kingdom, Albedo. Yes, the same Albedo, who belonged to the very nation that killed his older brother. And Philip believed he could win her over romantically as well. Maybe even overthrow Ainz Ooal Gown and take his place as the Sorcerer King. And these ambitions, to become the king of the Sorcerer Kingdom and to rail the Prime Minister, didn't stop him from attacking the grain supply shipment of the Sorcerer Kingdom to the war-torn Holy Kingdom. In other words, he attacked the homeland of his supposed new girlfriend and future wife. And not just soldiers, but an international aid convoy. And this idiotic move triggered a war of annihilation against the Kingdom of Ties, and even Albedo had to answer for it to Ainz Ooal Gown, because Philip's stupidity reflected poorly on her. I mean, she had wanted to create a third faction at court, the court of the Kingdom of Ties, in order for her plan to take over the entire kingdom to work. And this faction was supposed to be led by a complete idiot, which explains why she even talked to Philip in the first place. And Philip is not only just a textbook example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, he's also hilariously overqualified to play the role of a complete fool. Still, Ainz Ooal Gown realized that maybe the situation could be salvaged, and therefore he cautiously asked if it was still possible to fix things from the perspective of Demiurge and Albedo, which led to the idea that since the Sorcerer Kingdom was being kind to the Empire, that surrendered voluntarily, perhaps they should make an example of the hostile Kingdom of Ties, who didn't learn his lesson at the massacre of the Cat's Plain. So yeah, what could have been a peaceful subjugation ended with Philip being impaled by Albedo, not the way you might think, and the complete annihilation of the Kingdom of Ties. Which of course brings us to the next idiot, Ainz Ooal Gown himself. He lacks formal schooling, because in the year 2138 there's no free education anymore, and his mother had to work herself to death, like in She Experienced Karoshi, just so he could attend elementary school. And yes, Ainz had a strong work ethic, could think critically, and was eager to learn, but all the self-reflection, emotional intelligence and leadership skills that Philip lacked and that Ainz Ooal Gown had in spades was counteracted with his lack of social intelligence, shaped by loneliness and his emotional dampener that suppressed his feelings. He melancholically clung to the memories of his old friends. He saw the beings in the grey tomb as the children of his friends and attached emotional meaning to them, more than his friends probably ever did, since for Albedo, Demiurge and the rest, yes, these highest supreme beings were truly divine entities, but for the players, Albedo and Demiurge were just NPCs. And this, combined with the lack of education and his desire to live up to the standards he believed his friends had set, meant that Ainz couldn't be honest to himself. He couldn't ask questions or seek help, or learn from his otherwise brilliant subordinates, because he was obsessed with appearing like the genius supreme overlord they thought he was, and always had been. As a result, Ainz Ooal Gown only realized after 7 volumes that his people actually wanted to conquer the entire world, mistakenly believing that he ordered them to do so. And at that point, he felt there was nothing he could do without disappointing his NPCs or blowing his facade. Of course, he still had all options available to him, but his emotional detachment from the outside world, due to his emotional dampener, and his attachment to the NPCs, made him unable to act. And finally we come to a descendant of the 8 Great Kings, and one of the most powerful characters Ainz had to deal with, the Elven King Decem, and he waged war against the theocracy and even kidnapped their then strongest godkin to forcibly produce an heir, to put it in YouTube-friendly terms. But the war wasn't for land or power, it was so he could generate as many enemy soldiers as possible, to throw his own army of children, and of the spare elves he had, against them, hoping that one of his children would show the same potential as he and his father always had, or that another strong mate among the elven kind could be found. And he wanted to raise not just a successor, but he wanted to prove to the entire world how powerful elves really were, if the rest of elvenkind could just live up to his very own standards. In other words, the man has been on an ego trip for centuries, and his unbelievable power has made him completely disconnected from reality and unable to understand others. He has possibly the single worst social intelligence in the entirety of Overlord. Yes, much worse than Ainz Ooal Gown or any other being, because he didn't understand why his children were weak and why his fellow elves were weak, or why the godkin he kidnapped didn't willingly give himself, or another case of Aura and Mare, herself to him. After all, he was the elf king. He also didn't understand kindness, empathy, or how a king should really behave. And he couldn't comprehend why an elven woman, apparently the mother of one of his many failure children, cared so much about this single failure child, and that it perished, nor why she jumped off a watchtower shortly after. In the end, he assumed it wasn't grief or despair over the loss of a child, but shame for disappointing him. And like a gracious king, he accepted her apology, before sending for the daughter of another one of his attendees. And the emotions, lives, and fate of the elves meant so little to Decem that he couldn't even grasp basic emotions like maternal love. He had written off far too many of his children as failures, and had sacrificed them in his war against the theocracy to care anymore, to even have a real understanding of his own people. In short, Decem's stupidity stems from his snobbishness, his disconnectedness, and his completely delusional and detached worldview. And the problem with Decem is that even though he's a horrible character and creature, you can understand why he is such a scum. In his mind, he is better than everyone else, and every day, week, year, century, the world shows him that he is indeed stronger, faster, more magical, more powerful than anybody else. Even the dragons he had met. Apocalyptic threats in the new world to any nation couldn't really threaten him. Admittedly, he hadn't met the strongest of dragonkind, but he probably had ran into some frost dragons like Ainz Ooal Gown did. And he casually mentioned that their monstrous strength, endurance, their ability to fly, and magic still weren't enough to hurt him, that they need to rely on these menial and unsurprisingly mundane powers just to survive. And the way he listed off one overpowered trait of the dragons after another just shows how incredibly powerful he truly is, as the scion of one of the 8 Great Kings. And not even Slain could do something other than rescue the abducted godkin in his conflict with the slain theocracy. And he treated his people as cannon fodder and wrote them off because he didn't see any potential for strength in them, and he was proven time and again that he was actually right. And his complete lack of empathy, his view of himself as the center of the universe, and his overwhelming power had dulled him to everything. His children, his thousands of wives, his people's suffering and values, he was basically completely corrupted by his own power, because it made him so detached. He basically is a rich trust fund kid who doesn't know any better, because his everyday life constantly reinforces that yes, he's truly better than everybody else. Until he meets Ainz Ooal Gown, or rather until Ainz punches him through a wall, and until he met his end by meeting his dwarf at Zesshi, who stomps him twice under her iron boot. And Dakin was so blinded by his own power and centuries of untouchability that he couldn't even understand something as simple as mourning his own child. And so fittingly, his end came when he was confused and in shock, just recently having been resurrected by his own spell, just in time to be crushed again by Zesshi, who still stood over him, destroying his entire sense of self and power under her iron boot. And Overlord always had a knack for death by foot anyway, so... And with that said, this wraps up part 2 of my video about the biggest idiots in all of Overlord. And with that said, now it's your turn. What is your take on all of this? Let me know down in the comment section. And while you type, I say thank you very much to all of my Patreons for supporting this channel, thanks to all of my viewers for supporting it as well, and as usual, I say my special thanks to Order Daddy Order, ASK, Bad Girl Ye, Bad Burrito 316, Beezer, Ben C, Brandon S, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Din Pep, Dragonlord Placido Saxophone, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feralchivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Le Louche Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Lofrazer, Merowek, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, O'Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pentum, Personage, Ruru, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Q&A Caracos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Sir Axolotl, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc Warboss, Rocket Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Xenokai, and Sonagon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.